Speedrunning has always been a really interesting thing if you're a fan of Halo and then you just watch someone who knows Halo inside and out run the game really quickly. But what would happen if a bunch of filthy casuals just decided to jump in and try to beat Halo 3 as quickly as possible while also using the acrophobia skull recently added to MCC that lets you just kind of cruise right through everything? Well, interestingly enough, doing this makes the game kind of freak out, and a lot of really bizarre and really weird things started to happen to us because of the speed that we were going through it. So while we've spent some time messing around on a few levels, we decided to set out to play through all of Halo 3 as quickly as possible and just kind of see what falls apart or what changes along the way in Halo 3 on the MCC. And boy, did this run through get a little bit funky. So first, just before doing any run through of Halo, you gotta get the crew together. In this case, it was me, Rocket, Elijah, leading the charge and having host advantage with acrophobia. For whatever reason, if you're player 2 or player 3, or a player 4 if you have 4 players, you don't have the same abilities as the main acrophobia user. It seems to kind of wobble out for the other players. Then we got Rocket Luke in there also, you know, the guy who runs the channel with me. Some people still don't know that he exists. He also filmed everything or got all the footage for this and, you know, edit the whole video. And of course, we couldn't do it without Rocket Dim Entree, who a lot of people think his name is Dimitri or Dime Tree or Dim Entry. None of those work, though I am a fan of Dementry, but that's besides the point. We went ahead and set off on Sierra 117 to see what would happen if we just flew through the level as quickly as possible. Now, the first thing that was a little difficult was getting our grip with the acrophobia skull on. It is a little tricky to get used to using right away, and with Sierra 117, it's possibly the worst level to jump into first because of how windy the level is and all the very close and narrow entrances that are in each section of the level. Though, we did have some fun things happen while we were cruising past this level. For instance, when you get to the part where the pelicans typically get attacked and crashed, if you just fly right past it, you can actually make it to the crashed pelican before it starts to crash in the dialogue. And you hear all the stuff of Johnson talking about the pelican being crashed and getting captured and whatnot. You could just see the crash pelican. Also, when we got to the end section of the level where they go into the cutscene showing Sergeant Johnson getting captured, for whatever reason, the third player elite was just there in the cutscene with us, which never usually happens. We don't know how this one happened, but it's pretty funny to see. Then we flew straight over to where Sergeant Johnson was, kind of skipping the whole bridge area, and we found ourselves getting locked in the prison cell, which was a little bit awkward, especially because Sergeant Johnson was just kind of down. I don't know. He didn't seem too happy about it. Fortunately enough, we did find out that we could unlock the door by being on the inside, even though we weren't, you know, on the outside to open the door, which makes us wonder why Johnson never opened the door himself. But even after we did that, Johnson didn't seem too interested in leaving and going with us. He just kind of stayed in his little sad face mood or whatever. What we ended up finding out happened was we didn't hit the loading points on the bridge or whatever that causes Sergeant Johnson to be able to be saved or whatever. So once we ran across the bridge, things would work out. Johnson would come back. For whatever reason, some of the phantoms in the sky were delayed, so it seemed like we had more phantoms than normal. But the little breaks like this are more interesting because we typically are so used to experiencing a campaign level in one specific way. So when these little oddities like too many phantoms in the sky happen, it's kind of cool to see how the Halo 3 engine adapts to things not necessarily going as planned. Next, we jumped onto Crow's Nest, and actually for the most part there wasn't too much of stuff going on. There's a lot of walls that you can bump into along the way, so that's great. There was a lot of areas you have to clear enemies to progress, which was kind of restrictive in just letting us fly through it, though we did run into one serious problem that might have killed our entire run, and we ran into a potential soft lock, so we're a little bit nervous here. When you get to the section where this elevator is, you can just kind of fly across and get there right away. We noticed there's some really weird stuff going on with the death barriers for this elevator, where if you fly up too high, you can die. You could sometimes go in the elevator shaft and fly up to the top, but then the next wave of enemies wouldn't spawn in. And when we would call for the elevator to come, the door would never open for us. So we couldn't figure out what was going on with this. We thought we must have kind of broke it, and when we're up at the top walking around and there was no enemies there, we thought we were maybe stuck there and we had soft locked the game. We ended up having to revert and go back, and once we made our way across the lake thing again to where the elevator was, we realized the only thing that we had been missing the whole time is this one door. Right before we jumped across and flew past everything, we just had to make sure we opened that door first, and then it ended up enabling the elevator to allow us to enter with the door. So that ended up being a little bit cool, and we're happy we didn't just completely get oofed on this one. We ended up skipping the brutes later on in the level where they're at the bomb, which was kind of funny because we didn't have to actually fight them. We just flew in there, hit the button, and flew on out. And other than that, we just kind of floated at the top of the elevator that crashes normally, but it wasn't really that different of a level. Jumping onto Savo Highway, this level, we were a little bit unsure on how it would play with Acrophobia Skull on. We kind of anticipated this level to be a little bit slower paced, and we were kind of nervous we'd break a lot of the loading zones by just parting off of the map too quickly. But actually, for a matter of fact or whatever, we flew straight through this level really quickly. It only took us a couple of minutes maybe, and all we really had to do was at the end of the level, kill the shade turret, and then kill the shield, and the rest of the enemies despawned, cueing the cutscene. Going to the storm, this one was a little interesting because there are different areas where you have to kind of wait around. Like for instance, you have to kill enemies to have the door open before the AA Wraith area is kind of enabled, or you have to wait for the door behind to close. We weren't really sure which one it was, but for whatever reason, we were stuck waiting at this door for a little bit. And then in the next area with the AA Wraiths, we still had to do some waiting around for the game to kind of enable us to move on to the next area, even though we were just wiping stuff out. There's this area where we went a little bit too fast, and all the Marines were just kind of standing around talking about getting pinned down, though there was really no enemies left. And after that, we just quickly took the Scarab out, pushed through, and this level was pretty easily defeatable. Going to Floodgate, one of the shortest levels in Halo 3, we actually flew so fast, we actually managed to skip an entire Cortana encounter that normally interrupts you at one of the worst times ever. So that was kind of neat. But at the end of the level, we actually managed to hit the Cortana Gravemind trigger and the end cutscene at the same time, which ended up causing the actual cutscene while it's playing to kind of have a bit of an episode. We don't really know what happened. Chief randomly despawned for a second, and it wouldn't let us skip the cutscene after that, no matter who was pressing what button. So we ended up getting to watch the cutscene. Fortunately, it's one of the better cutscenes in Halo, so that was kind of neat. Going to the Ark, when we got to the area where the Mongoose is, I actually managed to fly ahead to see the ship crash and watch it land. Oddly enough, it's not too spectacular. All you see is the ship kind of stop right before it hits the crash site, and then it spawns in right below it. It's not an actual crash, but it was cool to see it happen because I was fast enough to loop around the corner. After you make your way through everything and you get down to Forward Unto Dawn and start making your way back to the area you're supposed to go into, if you fly really quickly, you can see a bunch of ghosts just kind of huddled up by the front entrance to this area. And when you get past the indoor section, we tried to take out the Scarab as soon as it walked by, but we found out you actually can't do damage to the core until after the Scarab is either out of bounds or is coming back into bounds. In the past, we've done the trick where you ride on the Scarab and you can take the Scarab out of bounds. It soft locks the game, but it was kind of fun. But in this case, what we ended up having to do was just wait for the Scarab to come back in and quickly take it out then. Also, before you take out the Scarab, you have to make sure you fly over each area as you normally would when rolling past in a tank, because that's how the loading sequences kind of work, but we figured that out with a little trial and error. At the end of this level, nothing really was all that different, except Luke found this random barrier that we could stand on, just under the map below where everything else was going on. But with just 3 levels left and the progress we had made so far, we were feeling confident enough in our abilities to make our way through the game way too quickly, even with some of the odd occurrences that happen. But we've run into problems on the Covenant before when using Acrophobia Skull. So right away, when we loaded up into Covenant, we kind of flew past everything, and we all got killed right away when we were hitting the first tower, because all those Prowlers were just parked in the garage before they rolled out, and they rolled out onto all 3 of us at the same time. So we had to start over. We made our way in there, and interestingly enough, this is an area that we were a little nervous about because we've caused issues by going too fast here before. What would normally happen is we would hit the elevator, fly up to the top to save time, and sometimes weird things would happen. We would either get stuck under the elevator because we would teleport or something on another player, or just all hell will break loose. But this time we tried flying up the elevator without even hitting the elevator button, and what happened on the other side was really interesting. When we got up there, the brutes were just chilling there. They didn't want to attack us, and they're actually pretty polite, which made taking them out much easier, but maybe a little more cruel. Nonetheless, we made our way out of this area, flew all the way around to where the hornets were. We made sure we jumped in a hornet real quick so we could get past the barrier, and flew to the third tower. And when we flew up that elevator shaft, we actually noticed the brutes do the same thing as they did in the first one, except this time they will shoot, but they will not walk. They'll just stay put, boots on the ground, locked in place. They don't use invisibility or anything. They're just standing there and shooting. Later on in the level, after the area with the scarab, however, if you fly straight past where all the rings are, you actually can't trigger the beam that makes the bridge to start the final cutscene. And we actually got really turned around and confused here because we didn't know what we were doing wrong to actually enable the thing to work. So we just kind of all flew around looking to try to trigger whatever we ended up missing. And finally, whatever happened undid itself and the cutscene would load. But then, while we were in the last leg of this level, all we had to do was make it to that end hallway and we'd be set. We managed to possibly hard lock the game, which would completely prevent us from beating this level. And of course, this had to happen at the very end. But what ended up happening is when we finished the cutscene, we flew straight full speed into the elevator shaft that you normally drop into, though I did have invincibility with me at the time and I had activated it also. Not sure if that played a role in it, but essentially we skipped whatever important loading sequence normally triggers and we were just kind of stuck there at the bottom of the elevator shaft and the end cutscene wouldn't start for whatever reason. Dim decided to go out and venture while Luke and I tried to explore this elevator for whatever reason. There really wasn't much going on in this little entrance exit shaft that was over here and we kind of tried to figure it out. Eventually Dim found that there were some loading sequences and enemy spawns that were skipped in the high velocity speed we flew through, and eventually the level ended up working. So that was really neat. But if you thought the Covenant was bad, it would only get worse. Except, honestly, it didn't really get much worse. But we did discover something really cool that was worth the entire run that we did not at all expect it to happen. Okay, so going on to Cortana, this level, kind of awful to try to fly through it quickly in Acrophobia. There was so much spawning on each other, bumping into things, getting lost again, getting lost a third time, and there wasn't too much actually discovered during this run. But going on to that last level, Halo, we made a huge discovery, at least to us, that we didn't expect to happen. Maybe someone else already knew this, but we were really excited to discover this. So during the boss fight with Guilty Spark, you can actually fly around kind of off of the bridge and get behind Guilty Spark. He'll continue to use his little yellow boom thing that he normally does, but while we were waiting for that whole sequence to end, I kind of pushed up on Johnson, and all of a sudden in that moment, right before Sergeant Johnson shoots at 343 Guilty Spark to kind of move him out of the way, there's a brief second where you can run straight up to Johnson and grab his Spartan laser before he shoots at Guilty Spark. Now, what was really funny though is when I traded my SMG for the Spartan laser, Johnson just shot my SMG at Guilty Spark. I also shot a Spartan laser at it, but I saw Johnson shoot the SMG, which led us down a huge rabbit hole of possibilities, which meant there was actually a way you could manipulate whatever weapon Johnson was holding as the weapon that he uses to move Guilty Spark out of the way. So we decided that this was really interesting and we needed to investigate a little bit further. So besides messing around with the SMG, we decided to speed past Guilty Spark again, this time with a different set of weapons so we could try out what looked coolest of Sergeant Johnson shooting at Guilty Spark. Now, the rocket launcher was pretty cool. The fuel rod gun worked just as well, but by far the best one was when I traded the gravity hammer that you can get at the beginning of the level for the Spartan laser. And when Sergeant Johnson says not for long, he just kind of holds the gravity hammer up above his head like it's some magical spell he's casting on Guilty Spark that makes him fly away. And just the idea of Wizard Sergeant Johnson with a gravity hammer became my favorite thing of the night and definitely made this whole run worth it, because it's just one of those things that's so silly and unexpected that just really is a great example of why we absolutely love Halo 3, and just the way that the sandbox functions and how Bungie was able to craft a game that when variables are switched out, very different things can happen, but the game for the most part tries to react and tries to work with all things considered. Unfortunately, it wasn't one of those situations where it was like a dead character with a weapon nearby. Even when Sergeant Johnson was laying there before he sits up, the weapon is still like attached to him as a living Marine, so we couldn't just give him no weapon, though it was really fun to just see him hold that gravity hammer up. Otherwise, the rest of the level we were able to beat. We just flew through the final area really quickly, and then in that final stretch to Forward Unto Dawn, somehow Dim and Luke both died, so it was all up to me. I decided to take a shortcut, and while we're not positive, we speculated that right when I hit the cutscene trigger, for whatever reason, it just snapped to the end of the level, skipped the cutscene right away, and started loading up the epilogue. So we don't know if it normally would have loaded the cutscene or not, but we'd like to think that because we went so fast, or we did it before the loading sequences, it didn't have the cutscene queued up and ready, so the cutscene never ends up playing, though the level was completed. Still, it's kind of interesting, and we were able to beat Halo 3 really, really quickly. This whole run, while we didn't explicitly time it, Luke will put a roundabout time on the screen. It was definitely the fastest run we've ever done for Halo 3. It was an interesting experience. But hey, if you guys liked this video, make sure you guys hit the like button down below, and be sure to subscribe with notifications on for more videos like this. We sometimes try to do good videos.
And also make sure to follow us on Twitter at Rocket Elijah. You can follow him over here, and at Rocket Sloth Luke, you can follow me. So make sure you follow both of us there. And thanks for watching our videos. We'll see you next time.